welcoming journalist, author, Suzy Spencer.
With the screen going up and down, I keep thinking, is this premature ejaculation or does it need Viagra? But then I also see Ben back there and I keep thinking, what kinky things is he going to be doing back there that, so he'll be doing something and then all of a sudden, boom, it falls over. So, oh, now there's two of them back there. Okay, we'll get on to the topic here as I have my notes upside down. But first of all, I want to thank Ben and Ellie for inviting me here, and Ellie for recommending me. And also, I want to start out with a little Twitter funny story. The other day, Ben and I were tweeting about this, and a blogger, a sex blogger in Great Britain saw it. And she tweeted back and said, "Are y'all talking about sex? Or are you talking about sex?" And Ben said, "We're talking about nookie. We're talking about the beast with two backs," which he tells me is Shakespeare. You can tell my great intelligence that I didn't know that. And whoopee. So with that, I decided, oh my gosh, I've got to up the ante on this. So let me read you a teeny tiny little excerpt from Secret Sex Lives. Shall we do a Vanna White? As everything blows away up here. It's a Monday in May, and I sit in my home at my desk, my wire rim glasses perched on the tip of my nose. I grab a pen and a yellow legal pad and click on my tape recorder. Via a three-way phone conference, I eavesdrop on Rex as he sits in his home and has phone sex with a married woman in El Paso, Texas, while Rex's wife sits at her job and his stepchildren sit at their school. Rex's voice is low, soft, measured, and sexy. I walk in with a hard-on, turn you around, rub my cock against your ass. He inserts lots of slow, cooing ums, ahs, and moans. Squeeze those big hips, bite your neck, lick your ear. I'm making my dick throb against you, and oh my gosh, I went to Baylor University. I can't read this first thing in the morning. How many of you had sex before you got here today? I'm not raising my hand either. How many will not admit you had sex first thing this morning? How many wish you had sex first thing? Okay, so I want to talk about embracing the embarrassing, because sex can sometimes be embarrassing. What can also be embarrassing is your childhood. Does this look like a future sex writer? Now, I also need to tell you that despite this saying, I have a drinking problem, and my family, we did not drink in the house. We did not drink outside the house either. We were a teetotaling family. This was given to me. And so, how do you go from this wonderful geeky nerd, and yes, I did get braces later on, how do you go from this to being a sex writer? This is how. You go to Baylor University. Because your mother tells you you can go to any school you want as long as it's Baylor. And there's a Baylor bear out here. Come on, where's Sikkim Bears? Yeah. And so my family really wanted me to be a banker or maybe a person who worked in the oil industry. So I ended up working briefly for Fortune magazine. I say briefly, it was 2 years. That's a long time. In fact, I even think I worked on that issue. But it was cold in New York, And I was sent on assignment to LA where it was bright and sunny, so I moved to LA. And I ended up going to USC where I got my MBA to get my family off my back. But what I really wanted to do was write. I wanted to be a combination of Jackie Collins and Larry McMurtry. We're going to embrace the embarrassing. What does this mean? This means you get the glitz and glamour of Jackie Collins, and you get the down-home humor of Larry McMurtry. I thought it was a great niche. Who's doing this? Well, apparently only I am the only one who thought it was a great niche, because my career went nowhere. We're going to embrace the failure too, because what happened is a friend of mine, who's now the editor of Austin Women, came to me and said, Suzy, there is this really trashy story out there, and you have to write it. I said, why don't you write it? She's a writer. She said, no, you have to write it. So I checked into it because, as I said, my career was going nowhere. So what ended up is 6 months later, I get a phone call offering me a contract on Wasted, a rich lesbian, her beautiful young girlfriend, and the killer who came between them. I went to Baylor. Do I really want to do this? I asked the agent who was negotiating the contract, I said, is this going to hurt my career as a novelist? And she said, no one's ever going to know you wrote the book, so go ahead. I put my name on the book. It's the only book I've ever had that hit the New York Times bestseller list. The book came out in 1998. It's still out. It's still selling. It's probably made me more money than any other book. Well, no, I take that back. I'll tell you about that later. But anyway, it's been into 3 printings, and it has a second edition that is updated, which, by the way, the killer in that email, I got a letter from him yesterday. Here we have the killer, Justin Thomas, and his murder victim, Regina Hartwell, the young, rich lesbian. And Justin stabbed her to death. When I was researching this book, I'm pulling out evidence out of a bag. One thing I learned is when you're digging into a bag of evidence, don't just stick your hand in there and pull it out. Look in first and see what you're pulling out, because I reached in and I pulled out a vial of her blood. I held her blood in my hands. I reached in again. I pulled out a vial of muscle tissue. I was holding her muscle tissue in my hands. I reached in and I pulled out her retainer with her teeth still in it. This is Justin and Regina's mutual lover, Kim LeBlanc. She was a cheerleader at Lake Travis High School. She was in the National Honor Society at Lake Travis. She was a co-ed at UT. And though she denies any involvement in the crime, even though she told Justin to get Regina out of her life, she does admit that she and Justin burned Regina's body. I held Regina's burned clothes in my hands. I could smell the soot still in them. This kind of stuff never, ever leaves you. Never. I wrote 2 more true crime books when I was only planning on writing maybe 1 or 2. When I get a phone call from my agent saying, would you write a book about Andrea Yates, the Houston mother who drowned her 5 children? I didn't want to do it. But once again, I had no income. I went to my family, I said, what do you think? And they said, someone's going to write the book. Why don't you do it? Because you'll do it with more compassion, sympathy, whatever, than anyone else will. So I did it. I attended the kids' funeral. I saw their bodies. I saw their favorite blankets. I saw the 5 hearses, the coffins, those white coffins with those little children. You don't forget that. It never leaves you. Rusty Yates was creating the kids' website during all of this. And all the national media who was covering this left for 9/11, which meant Rusty didn't have anyone to talk to me. So he would call me on Saturday night saying, I knew you'd be home, you're a geek, you're a nerd, you'd be alone. And he would send me videos of the kids. I would wake up in the middle of the night and go watch these videos. I watched them until I could hear the kids' voices in my head, until I felt like I knew them. I visited with Rusty in the house where Regina killed the kids. I'm standing in the bathroom staring at the bathtub where she killed them. I go into the bedroom where she laid them afterwards. I'm staring at the bed where she put them. This stuff never, ever leaves you. So after 4 true crime books, and I want you to look at this for a minute. See if you see a theme here. There's Wasted, about the lesbian love triangle. There's Wages of Sin, which was about a Southern Baptist killer stripper who grew up devout Southern Baptist, became a stripper at the Yellow Rose, and then killed. Breaking Point, where they had 5 kids. And The Fortune Hunter, which is where a married woman convinced her lesbian lover to shoot her husband because she wanted the money. Do you see a theme here? 2 themes. 1, sex. 1, depression. I got so depressed because, like I say, this stuff never, ever leaves you. It is in my soul. It is in my heart. I carry it every day. I was trapped by the depression. I was trapped by my success, because everyone thinks she's the true crime writer. Michael Corcoran at the Austin American-Statesman by then started calling me the true crime writer. I just thought of myself as a writer until he announces I'm a true crime writer, and it sticks. Everyone starts doing it. I'm trapped by my image, and I'm trapped by the formula of true crime because there is a distinct formula you have to stick to. How do I break out? How do I go to this person who wanted to be a cross between Larry McMurtry and Make You Laugh and the glitz and glamour of Jackie Collins? How do you do that? You become a sex writer. And I gotta say, this was not my idea. I didn't go, oh, I'm gonna write about sex. My agent suggested it. By now I had left the other agent because she only wanted to keep me in true crime. I went to one who was willing to break me out, and he said, let's do a book on sex. A very journalistic, hands-off, professional look, objective. Because you can't, it's gotta be hands-off and journalistic to protect your integrity and to build your career. So once again, I talk to my family and they say, okay. But the bottom line, besides my mother and my agent thinking I could make a lot of money on this, was I desperately needed to laugh. Oh gosh, that's all I really wanted in life, was to laugh again. And let's face it, those who can do sex, do it, and those who can't, make jokes about it. I went to Baylor. I was planning on being a virgin for life because I didn't want to get married. And at Baylor, they taught you a woman is not a woman until she's a rose who fully blooms and has kids, and I did not want to do anything like that. So I made lots of sex jokes. So what do you do to laugh? You go on Craigslist, Casual Encounters, and post an ad saying, need to talk about sex. I want people to tell me the most intricate details of their sex lives. And I knew I had no formula on this. All I knew was that I just had to start at point one and get to the last chapter and tell a story, and it could go any direction. And I was totally confused about what direction, but it didn't matter because I was on Craigslist and people were making me laugh. And I got to embrace the laughter because believe me, when you have kinky people, they love to laugh. They make such great jokes. So, one of my very first sources, in fact, not one of mine, the very, very first source, emailed me eventually and sent me her drip list. How many know what a drip list is? Exactly. But do not go on the Katie Couric show and mention the drip list because they will have a freak out and edit it out because it is so blasted obscene. A drip list is what makes a woman drip sexually. So one of her, I think it was her number one thing on her drip list was fully surrendered. Ben and I were talking about how to say this, and he said, well, it's what Garfield does. And then I was driving home and I'm thinking, well, Garfield's a guy. So, yeah, we're talking about a girl. So just think of Garfalida or something. I don't know, but a female. Do you get my drift? Do you get my drift? Nobody's getting. Ben, I'm blaming that on you. Okay, we're going to say it's fully surrendered pussy licking. I did go to Baylor. I got a letter yesterday. After I left Ben, I went into my post office box and there was a letter from Justin Thomas, the killer in my first book. And he said, I saw you on Katie Couric talking about secret sex lives. What I revealed on there, I'm not going to tell you, you're going to have to read the dadgum book because I didn't want it revealed. But anyway, we shall move on. What I didn't realize as I was going out interviewing all these people and calling up my editor and saying, oh, I got to tell you this story. And I'd tell her about what happened with this sex source and that sex source and the funny things they said in our interactions. And she said, stop. Wait, we don't want the book you sold us. We don't want the journalistic hands-off book. We want a memoir. I'm a journalist. I try to keep my thoughts, my feelings to myself. I did not want to do this, but this meant all of a sudden I had to have turning points and character growth and somebody who changes over time. I had to embrace the terrifying. This is one of the things that with sex and creativity that I have learned most. Because I, as a writer, always think you have to write about what scares you. With this, I didn't write about what scares me. I wrote about what terrifies me. Because I was the girl who was going to be a virgin the rest of my life. And most families, their mothers, their fathers talk to them about, oh, when you grow up and we go to your wedding and oh, when are you going to have grandkids? And my family, it was more like, when are you going to be the CEO or president of that bank? You want to date? Oh God, that's so silly. This kind of stuff terrified me. Honey, my knees weren't just sewn together, they were super glued, sewn together, bound, everything you could do. And I have to go out and write about my sex life, particularly, well, let me tell you one thing. When I had a family meeting about this saying, oh, what do y'all think about this? My cousin, who at the time was teaching at a Christian school, he said, because everybody was against this but my mother and my cousin, he said, yeah, That's a good idea, because maybe you can teach people, and you're too old to be tempted by this. I was about to turn 50. I'm not going to say what I thought, but let's just say it has a sexual connotation there also. We Baylor people do have a tendency to let loose sometimes. So, besides doing what terrifies you, I want to talk to you about embracing the loneliness. Because one of the things I learned by interviewing God knows how many people, I should have counted it up. I had a sex survey online, which by the way is still online and you can take it. But no matter how kinky you are, no matter how wild and crazy, no matter how madly you are in love with your wife or your husband, there is a huge amount of loneliness in this country. It's overwhelming. And one of the reasons there is so much loneliness is because people have these secret desires that they want to act on. And some of them they have to act on them. But they're terrified of telling the person they love most about this, because they're fear of being rejected, that they'll be kicked out of the house. And I understand that. I didn't understand it when I was writing or doing my research, but when I sat down and wrote the book and I was having to come to that ending with the turning point, and I was revealing things about this that my family would freak out over, and boy, did they. I know that fear of the loneliness. And to create the best you can, you have to embrace the loneliness. But there's also another thing about embracing the play. And again, all of this comes into what makes you creative. How many of you know Owen Edgerton in town? Fabulous guy. He is a novelist, he's a screenwriter, he does improv, he is hysterically funny, and he was being interviewed by the Writers League of Texas, which if you write, you must join, it's fabulous. And he said, they were asking him about play, and he said, I also feel you have to play, deep play. We forget how essential play is to the creative process. Play can be a wonderfully serious venture. We play in music, in games, in lovemaking, that exploration, that understanding that failure is part of the process, that willingness to risk and discover, that thrill, that thrill, that thrill. And I got to play in this book. I went to kink conventions in New Jersey. I went to swing conventions in Las Vegas. I went to swing resorts in Mexico, and I went to Hito in Jamaica for wild women vacations in kink in the Caribbean. This is not Suzy Spencer that you see here. I did not know that I had this in me. But I played, I laughed. The woman with Wild Women Vacation said, God, you came here so stressed looking in after 2 or 3 days. Look at you. And also, look at those damn flabby arms. Oh my gosh. So that's the next thing, honey. Embrace the you. The good, the bad, the ugly, the flabby, the every bit of you. The geek, the nerd, the one who is terrified, the one who is lonely, the one who wants to break out of the formula and do something totally different, and that will help you create. At least it has me, because I think Secret Sex Wives is the best book I've ever written, and it does not show what I can do in the future. So go out there, be fully you, and create magic. Thank you.